The morning air in suburban Houston carried the warmth of early sunlight and the faint scent of freshly mown grass as I stepped out of my car, clutching my clutch tighter than I intended. The wedding hall gleamed under the golden rays, decorated with pristine white linens and pale roses that smelled faintly of vanilla and dew. Guests milled about, laughing softly, exchanging pleasantries, their polished shoes tapping lightly against the stone pathway. I took a deep breath, smoothing the folds of my dress, trying to exude calm confidence while my heart thumped against my ribs. I had rehearsed my smile in the mirror, adjusted my hair, and straightened the shoulders of my dress, hoping it would convey poise rather than anxiety. Despite years of being overlooked, today I told myself, maybe she, the sister I had always tried to impress, would finally see me. My mother floated past in her sunny yellow dress, her voice chirping, encouraging a conversation with distant relatives. She smiled at me warmly, but her eyes flicked momentarily toward my sister with that familiar deference, a quiet submission I had long observed and silently resented. My sister, in her tailored gown and perfect posture, had already established her dominion, greeting guests with an effortless grace that seemed almost rehearsed. Her aura commanded the room, and I felt the pull of old insecurities knotting my stomach as I tried to imagine sitting next to her, sharing in her special day without being dismissed. The chatter around me blurred as I scanned the room. The sunlight hit the polished wooden floors just so, catching the glint of the floral arrangements and the silver cutlery lined up on the tables. My fingers grazed the edge of my clutch again, a small gesture to steady myself. I reminded myself that I was here as part of the family, deserving of recognition, deserving of presence. But as I approached, the subtle glances of some guests, averted when they met mine, reminded me that the invisible lines of family hierarchy were not easy to cross. My sister's smile widened as she spotted me, and something in her expression shifted, a shadow that promised the familiar sting of being small, overlooked, and underestimated. And then she spoke, her voice cutting cleanly through the ambient hum, "Your seat is in the kitchen." I froze, the words hitting like a slap disguised in calm politeness. My mother's laughter followed, light and airy, and she applauded, encouraging the gesture, cementing my humiliation before anyone could intervene. The whisper of guests filled the gaps between my thoughts, curious murmurs carrying on the gentle Texan morning breeze. I could feel my pulse spike, hot and fast, my hands trembling imperceptibly as I tried to maintain composure. Every eye that glanced in my direction carried a silent assessment, a judgment that weighed heavier than any words. Memories surfaced unbidden, birthday parties where my contributions had gone unnoticed, school awards tucked away in drawers while my sister received praise for anything she attempted, family vacations where I had been the invisible helper behind the scenes. Each flashback compounded the sting of the present moment, the cumulative ache of being consistently invisible. I shifted slightly, attempting to steady my breathing, to remind myself that dignity was internal, that composure could be my shield even if the world refused to notice my worth. The glances of the guests were telling, though. A few smiled softly, acknowledging me with subtle warmth, tiny acts of recognition that my family seemed incapable of offering. Among them, I caught sight of someone, a quiet observer, whose eyes met mine for a moment longer than socially necessary. There was a silent acknowledgement there, a glimmer of understanding that I had not been entirely alone in my isolation. My mind ticked through options: confront, retreat, or hold my ground with quiet observation. I chose the latter, allowing myself a semblance of control in a situation designed to diminish me. I found a spot behind a decorative pillar, partially hidden from the main aisle, where I could still see my sister gliding forward but remain somewhat shielded. The pillar became a symbol of my current state, obscured, overlooked, yet not entirely absent. From this vantage, I could see the way the sunlight caught her veil, the subtle movement of her hands, the expressions on the faces of the wedding party. I drew in a slow breath, letting the initial shock settle into a simmering resolve. The embarrassment stung, but beneath it was a growing awareness that this day would not erase me, that my presence mattered even if they chose to ignore it. Small, deliberate actions grounded me. I adjusted my posture, straightened my back, and let my eyes rest briefly on those few sympathetic smiles among the guests. I whispered quietly to myself, "I will not be erased this time." The words felt like a mantra, a declaration to myself in the silent chaos of the hall. My intelligence and observation became my allies, the subtle strategy forming almost unconsciously. I noticed the way the light reflected off a champagne glass, the way a guest shifted nervously in their seat, the faint sound of music filtering from the corners of the hall. Every detail was information, and I took it in, quietly plotting how I might assert my presence without sacrificing composure. And then, a gentle tap on my shoulder. I turned to see a stranger, someone I had not noticed in the morning bustle, offering a small smile and a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The gesture was fleeting but potent, sending a ripple of hope through me. For a moment, my chest felt lighter, my mind momentarily freed from the weight of familial dismissal. It was a small signal, but one that reminded me I was seen, that recognition could come even in unexpected ways. Curiosity and cautious optimism flickered through me, intertwining with the humiliation I had endured, hinting that the day was far from over, and perhaps my story was just beginning. I settled further behind the pillar, letting its solid presence shield me from the main aisle. From this vantage, I caught glimpses of the wedding unfolding, my sister laughing with friends, her gestures flawless, her voice ringing clear over the soft hum of the guests. The small space I had claimed was uncomfortable, but it sharpened my awareness. Every subtle exchange, every whispered joke that seemed to pass over my head, became data points I stored carefully. There was indignation simmering beneath my skin, yes, but also a quiet patience forming. I reminded myself that this position, though humiliating, offered me a view few could claim, an unfiltered window into the dynamics of the room, of the family I'd long struggled to navigate. The favoritism toward my sister was unmistakable, a knowing smile here, a sidelong glance there, and the occasional subtle mockery from extended relatives punctuated the air. I felt the familiar ache of invisibility but tempered it with awareness. The moment to assert myself hadn't arrived yet. As I observed, my attention flickered to a few guests offering small, discreet gestures, an encouraging nod, a brief smile, a slightly prolonged handshake. One was a distant cousin I had barely interacted with in years, the other a family friend who had always quietly acknowledged my efforts without comment. The realization hit me, someone outside my immediate family saw me, not as an afterthought, but as a person worthy of notice. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but enough to kindle a cautious optimism within me. I allowed myself a small, private smile, imagining the possibilities that could unfold if these subtle allies were aware of my presence and my determination. I made a mental note to remember them, to gauge how they might fit into the unspoken strategies forming in my mind. Thoughts of past family gatherings drifted through me, not the ones I had recounted before, but moments that traced a consistent pattern of exclusion. Holidays where my ideas were dismissed, projects at family events quietly reassigned to my sister, the casual neglect that had become routine. I began calculating quietly, when to assert myself, when to watch and gather information, how to navigate the crowd without drawing premature attention. I reminded myself of my strengths, of the intelligence and composure I had cultivated over the years, and let a subtle self-affirmation take hold. The internal debate raged silently, act now and risk confrontation, or bide my time, watch carefully, and strike with precision. Patience, I realized, could be a far more powerful weapon than immediate reaction. I focused on my sister then, noting the way she carried herself, the little imperious gestures toward the staff, the clipped tone she used when addressing guests who displeased her. She exuded confidence, sometimes bordering on arrogance, and I cataloged these weaknesses, the brief lapses of attention, the overconfidence in her control. I imagined how these small cracks could later be leveraged, not now, but eventually, when I had fully assessed the landscape and could act decisively. My gaze sharpened, my mind calculating, dissecting her influence over others, the timing of her movements, the subtle power plays that went unnoticed by most. A ripple of minor conflict emerged as one of her closest friends leaned a little too close, whispering something meant to unsettle me. I stayed still, controlling my breathing, maintaining composure, letting the tension hang in the air without acknowledgement. Guests nearby exchanged curious glances, a few eyebrows raised as the subtle exchange passed unremarked aloud. Inside, I reminded myself firmly, I would not allow this to embarrass me twice. Frustration buzzed quietly beneath the surface, but it was tempered by control, by a strategic patience that allowed me to process the moment fully and plan my response. Every interaction became a study in human behavior, a puzzle I could manipulate when the time was right. Then, a stranger approached, an older guest, not immediately recognizable in the stream of attendees, offering a small, discreet smile and a brief nod. I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that recognition could come from outside my family, that support could exist beyond those who had long diminished my presence. The simple gesture sparked a mental plan forming, subtle but deliberate. Note who was friendly, who could be trusted, who might later reinforce my position quietly but effectively. There was no rush, only the careful assembly of allies and knowledge, the shaping of a comeback that had to be precise to succeed. By the time the mid-morning sunlight softened through the hall's windows, I felt a quiet resolve settling into my chest. The wedding continued, oblivious to the careful calculations occurring in my mind. I was small in their eyes, tucked behind a pillar, but not powerless. I had seen, I had noted, and I had decided. When the time came, I would act, not impulsively, not with anger, but with purpose, with precision, and with the knowledge that I had prepared myself for this very moment. Until then, I would watch, learn, and let the quiet strength of patience guide my next move. The buffet area hummed with conversation, laughter spilling across the hall as I edged closer to a vantage point where I could watch without being noticed. I cataloged every subtle interaction, who leaned in to hear my sister's jokes, who avoided meeting her gaze, the slight hesitation before laughter from distant relatives. Timing mattered, the speeches, the cake cutting, the small toasts, they all offered windows where my presence, subtle yet deliberate, could ripple quietly through the crowd. Every movement, every gesture, became a data point. I noted opportunities and vulnerabilities alike, mentally mapping the social hierarchy as if it were a chessboard. My focus sharpened, and beneath the surface, a quiet intensity began to grow, coiling around me like a spring ready to release. Memories of family events trickled into my thoughts, past gatherings marked by small exclusions that had rendered me invisible without blatant cruelty. I didn't repeat the old wounds, but I allowed the patterns to inform strategy. I predicted her likely behaviors, her reactions to attention, her tendency to monopolize moments of acclaim. The phrase ran through my mind, a quiet mantra, this time, I'll be ready, not reactive. The sense of controlled frustration gave way to an intellectual empowerment, a feeling that I could engage deliberately, rather than being swept along by others' whims. Observation and planning became my instruments, patience, my ally. Peripheral guests offered subtle cues of acknowledgement. A distant cousin smiled knowingly as our eyes met briefly, a family friend whispered a compliment that could have gone unnoticed by anyone else. These fleeting affirmations were quiet, yet meaningful, a reminder that not all recognition came from my immediate family. I cataloged these gestures, noting who might be counted on as a subtle ally, someone who could later reinforce my presence or serve as a confidant. It was an invisible network forming silently around me, a quiet solidarity that gave shape to my emerging plan. Observing the flow of social dynamics, how people clustered, how laughter spread, how attention shifted, I found reassurance that patience and timing could translate into influence. Then I noticed my sister, ever confident, occasionally overstepping in ways she didn't realize. A slight misstep in tone toward a waiter, an inattentive gesture that left a guest waiting, a small faux pas in coordinating the bouquet presentation. I recorded these mentally, each misstep a seed of potential leverage, a crack in the otherwise polished facade. Quiet satisfaction mingled with anticipation, each observation fed the mental blueprint I was constructing. I imagined the moments where subtle corrections or gentle exposures could shift perception without confrontation, where influence could be quietly asserted and respect quietly reclaimed. A minor ally added fuel to my determination. A stranger, an older relative whose presence I'd noted in passing, offered a brief nod and the faintest smile, accompanied by a whisper, "I see you." The simplicity of recognition carried a weight I hadn't expected. It reminded me that value isn't always defined by the family that overlooks you, but by those who notice quietly, consistently. That nod planted a seed of resolve, a quiet boost to confidence, and the awareness that a plan could be layered, tested, and executed with care and precision. It was an affirmation that strategic patience could transform into meaningful action. I began mentally outlining possibilities, weighing scenarios like a conductor arranging notes in a symphony. Public acknowledgement, subtle exposure of unfair treatment, a carefully timed gesture that would convey presence without overt confrontation, each was imagined and rehearsed silently. A folded napkin, positioned by the buffet as if by accident, caught my eye. A small detail, but in my mind it became an echo anchor, a symbolic reminder that even minor observations could carry future significance. Each reinforcement of self-worth, each reflection on the intelligence and composure I possessed, solidified the framework for my quiet intervention. By mid-afternoon, the hum of celebration continued, oblivious to the intricate mental architecture I had built. I wasn't rushing. Every glance, every measured smile, every jot of observation prepared me for a subtle action I would initiate. The plan had begun, not loudly, not aggressively, but quietly, intentionally, and with precise attention to detail. I felt the stirrings of agency, the first pulse of an assertion that could ripple through the gathering without alarming the unobservant. A minor act, a glance, a correction, perhaps a word placed with care, this would be my first step. I let the anticipation settle alongside a quiet determination, the kind of resolve born from years of observing, reflecting, and waiting for the precise moment to act. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the side seating areas near the dessert table, casting long shadows that mirrored the tension I carried with me. I moved deliberately, choosing a seat that placed me closer to the center of attention, though not boldly enough to invite confrontation. My sister's laugh caught my eye, sharp and self-satisfied, and I noted the subtle shift in her posture as she realized I had claimed more visibility. It was a quiet assertion, one small act of reclamation, but it carried weight. I measured social cues carefully, gauging her discomfort without igniting an overt clash. My heart beat with cautious empowerment as I reminded myself that influence need not shout to be felt. Watching my mother and extended family, I saw their reactions ripple across the room. A raised brow here, a barely perceptible whisper there, shifts in posture that spoke volumes. Each expression became a data point, helping me anticipate who might act as an ally, who would watch silently, and who might subtly oppose me. My awareness grew sharper, tension rising gently as I absorbed each cue. I stayed observant, letting curiosity guide me through the social labyrinth while keeping composure intact, my mind balancing caution and strategy. Engaging lightly with a few guests, I offered a smile, a word of humor, a gentle nod to those who might otherwise overlook me. Their subtle returns, polite and warm, contrasted sharply with the past, when my presence was treated as invisible. I noticed small moments of recognition, soft chuckles at my dry remarks, affirmations in their attentive eyes. Each interaction built a quiet satisfaction, a proof that I could command respect without force. I internalized the difference, noting the potential of charm and intelligence as quiet tools of influence, carefully observing the ebb and flow of attention across the hall. Then came the first real test. My sister, sharp and unyielding, tossed a minor barb my way, a mocking tone disguised as casual conversation, a cutting remark aimed just within earshot. My pulse quickened, but I stayed silent, logging the slight as evidence for future strategic action. Her gestures, the cadence of her voice, and the small reactions from guests were all stored in my mind, every detail contributing to a mental map I could later use. I recognized that the smallest infractions often revealed more about a person's weaknesses than their overt actions. My restraint became deliberate, a calculated choice in a larger game unfolding quietly before me. A peripheral ally, a distant family friend I had scarcely noticed, provided a subtle yet meaningful sign, a nod, a whispered encouragement as they passed by. The recognition hit me in a way my sister's theatrics could never achieve. I felt the stirrings of exhilaration, tempered by awareness, as the thought solidified in my mind, I am not invisible, and this matters. Their acknowledgement fortified my resolve, reminding me that influence and recognition can exist beyond immediate family, and that measured assertion could yield profound results. I turned my attention to mental mapping, considering how to escalate without overplaying my hand. Each potential move was weighed: subtle confrontations, timed remarks, small but pointed gestures that highlighted fairness and intelligence. I noticed the delicate arrangement of napkins at the dessert table, the careful placement of floral centerpieces, details that seemed trivial but could serve as anchors for attention or symbolism when the time was right. Timing would be everything, and I rehearsed silent scenarios, considering when each action would carry the most impact while maintaining composure and dignity. By the end of the afternoon, I felt the plan crystallizing. Each observation, each small interaction, each subtle acknowledgement contributed to a growing blueprint for influence. I wasn't rushing, but the groundwork was laid, a quiet challenge initiated, measured, and deliberate. Family dynamics were being tested, subtly and strategically, with an eye toward eventual assertion. My awareness of every glance, every movement, and every whispered comment created a foundation for what would come next, a careful escalation that would demand attention without forcing it, proving that quiet intelligence and composure could claim the recognition denied to me for so long. The early evening light spilled through the tall windows of the main hall, casting a soft glow over the bustling reception. I drew a steadying breath, feeling the weight of the afternoon's observations settle into a focused resolve. The subtle nods, fleeting smiles, and attentive glances from strangers and distant relatives reminded me that I wasn't invisible after all. Today, I would test that truth, not with grand declarations, but with a careful, deliberate step into the center of recognition. I reminded myself to be patient, to act with precision and intelligence. My heart thudded quietly, anticipation mingling with attention sharpened by months, no, years, of subtle neglect. I watched my sister, flitting between guests with practiced charm, and my mother, always ready with a gentle laugh or approving word. Timing was critical. I scanned the room, noting the moments when attention would naturally shift, identifying when a small, clever move could carry weight without causing a scene. I considered each guest's position and likelihood to either witness or intervene, mentally cataloging allies and neutral observers. It was like playing chess on a living board, each piece moving subtly yet purposefully toward the moment of impact. The opportunity came at last. As my sister laughed over a story with a group near the buffet, I stepped slightly forward, allowing my presence to occupy a visible space near the table. It was a minor move, almost imperceptible, yet it commanded attention. Eyes flickered, some in surprise, others in recognition. My sister paused mid-laugh, her expression tightening just enough to betray discomfort. I held my stance, letting the subtle shift speak louder than any words. Internally, I noted every reaction, storing them for later strategic use. The satisfaction of being acknowledged, even indirectly, was immediate, energizing, and quietly empowering. Family responses unfolded in a dance of nuance. My mother, catching the subtle assertion, hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her usually composed face. My sister's attempts to redirect attention were just that, attempts, but they lacked the finesse to diminish the quiet authority I had claimed. Other relatives whispered among themselves, some glancing my way with curiosity, others offering barely perceptible nods of recognition. The room was alive with subtle shifts, and I could feel a growing confidence surge within me. Being seen, acknowledged, mattered more than I had realized. This small victory was a foothold, proof that quiet intelligence and presence could carve space even in a family steeped in hierarchy. Then came a subtle but pivotal confirmation. A respected family friend, someone whose opinion carried weight among both relatives and my sister, offered a discreet nod and a small smile in my direction. That single, understated gesture carried immense significance. It validated my assessment of the room and my decision to act. A surge of quiet triumph filled me as I absorbed the signal. My presence was being recognized not just superficially, but as something worthy of attention. It was encouragement enough to continue, a reassurance that strategy and patience were effective allies. I spent the following moments mapping the room mentally, noting interactions, gestures, and positions that could serve as anchors for future interventions. A folded napkin caught my eye, seemingly trivial, but I recognized its potential as a subtle marker in a later, more visible confrontation. Each observation was a piece of the puzzle, each small acknowledgement a seed of influence that I would cultivate carefully. My determination solidified, tempered with patience. The evening was still young, and the first visible assertion of my presence had only begun to shift perceptions. By the time the dessert table was fully attended, I had traced the outlines of a larger plan in my mind. Every glance I had received, every nod or whisper of recognition, became a thread weaving together a quiet but deliberate strategy. I was no longer content to fade into the background. Subtle influence, intelligently applied, could command respect without brazen confrontation. And as I settled back into my observation, I knew the next move, when executed, would extend this tentative power into a tangible shift within the family dynamic. Tonight, the first public stand was not just about recognition, it was the foundation for reclaiming the respect that had long been denied. Evening had settled over the Houston reception hall, the lights casting a warm glow on polished floors and sparkling glassware. I felt it, the subtle tension rolling off my sister in waves. Her smiles were tighter, gestures slightly more deliberate, as if testing whether I would retreat. I didn't. My eyes scanned the crowd, noting whispers and sidelong glances from guests, each observation sharpening my resolve. I knew I couldn't allow her subtle hostilities to go unchecked. Months of quiet calculation led to this moment, standing firmly, alert, and prepared. I weighed my options. A direct confrontation carried risks, humiliation, gossip, the family's judgment, but passive observation meant surrender. I reminded myself that patience had its place, yet action required courage. My mind mapped the evening, timing, positioning, and the ripple effect each statement could create. Moral considerations blended with strategy. I could be measured yet assertive, maintaining composure while signaling that I would no longer be invisible. My heart raced, not with fear, but anticipation, a precise, simmering energy. The moment arrived. A subtle misstatement from my sister regarding a seating arrangement gave me the opening I had been waiting for. With deliberate calm, I spoke, correcting the inaccuracy and asserting my rightful place. My words were measured, sharp, yet unshakably poised. The room shifted, some glances curious, others quietly approving. I caught my mother's hesitant glance, the flicker of surprise in my sister's eyes. Every detail mattered, posture, tone, the pause in conversation that my statement created. I logged it all mentally, evidence for future moves, proof that strategic courage worked. My sister attempted to recover, a sarcastic quip aimed to dismiss my correction. I held my ground, letting her words hang without capitulation. Her effort lacked impact, the subtle power shift was already underway. The room responded, a ripple among guests, murmurs, and slightly widened eyes acknowledging the unspoken tension. I noticed how a few people leaned in, perceptive, catching the nuances of our exchange. It was quiet, understated, yet undeniable. I had claimed presence without raising my voice, proving that intelligence and composure commanded respect more effectively than confrontation alone. Then, as if confirming the strategy, a respected guest, one whose opinion carried weight in the family, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the silent reinforcement I had been waiting for. Pride and quiet empowerment surged, grounded in recognition and strategic acumen. I could feel the subtle shift, my position no longer passive, my intelligence acknowledged, and my standing among the family subtly recalibrated. Every observation I had made, the gestures, the glances, the whispered comments, had informed the timing, and it worked. I was no longer the overlooked sister, I had a foothold. As the evening continued, I mentally mapped the room, anticipating future interactions. Each nod, each slight smile, became part of a larger strategy. I considered how the placement of tables, the flow of guests, even the minor details of centerpieces and napkin folds could serve as anchors for future assertions. My mind was alert, calculating, yet emotionally grounded. This confrontation was not an outburst, it was an intelligent, deliberate act. Standing my ground required vigilance, strategic thinking, and the awareness that every small move contributed to a larger plan. By the time the music swelled for the evening dances, I felt an unspoken victory settling in. The subtle tension I had orchestrated lingered in the air, and I was acutely aware of the power shift among my family and guests. I had tested boundaries, claimed respect, and observed the resulting dynamics with clarity. The stage was set for the next move. My presence was no longer questioned, my intelligence respected, and my strategy validated. The confrontation had succeeded not in spectacle, but in quiet, deliberate assertion. Tonight, I had stood my ground, and it had mattered. The upper balcony of the Houston reception hall offered a vantage point few noticed. I leaned against the railing, scanning the room below, my pulse quickening as I sensed my sister orchestrating another public slight. Her laughter, sharp and deliberate, cut across the lounge area, drawing attention and prompting murmurs from nearby guests. I felt the familiar tension of past humiliations, yet now it sharpened my focus. I breathed slowly, cataloging reactions, noting alliances and vulnerabilities. This was no longer about invisibility, it was about precision and strategy. Every move, every glance mattered. A folded envelope on the corner table caught my attention, tucked carelessly among floral arrangements. Curiosity propelled me closer, and as I opened it, a document revealed itself, a subtle misattribution, a manipulated gift, evidence of my sister's quiet maneuvering to shape perceptions about me. Shock hit first, a cold, hollow weight pressing against my chest. Betrayal followed, twisting through memories of earlier slights. Yet as quickly as anger flared, clarity settled in. Each deceitful action became a puzzle piece in my growing strategy. I could use this knowledge, leverage it with precision. I clenched my jaw, letting determination override the sting of exposure. I tested the waters subtly, drawing attention without confrontation. A carefully timed remark to a nearby cousin highlighted a fact my sister had misrepresented, framed in casual observation rather than accusation. Eyes flicked toward us, measuring reactions. I anticipated her counterarguments, her attempts to reclaim narrative control, but my prior alliances and careful observation gave me leverage. Every nuance, the slight widening of a guest's eyes, the faint nod from a distant uncle, was data. I registered it all, reinforcing my quiet empowerment. I realized that strategy required patience, timing, and knowledge, not just audacity. Then, unexpectedly, an overlooked guest, a distant family friend, offered validation, a quiet acknowledgement, a small but firm smile as if saying, "I see you, and it matters." Relief washed over me, grounding the tumultuous emotions that had threatened to cloud judgment. This subtle support provided credibility without overt confrontation, confirming that I was not alone and that my calculated approach was resonating with the right observers. Strengthened by this quiet ally, I felt a renewed sense of positioning for the moves yet to come. Preparation for a decisive confrontation occupied the remainder of my thoughts. I rehearsed measured responses, considered timing and setting, visualized the impact of revealing the evidence strategically. I connected it to the evening's layout, the balcony, the lounge, the flow of guests, ensuring that each potential disclosure would carry maximum effect. Mental scripts formed, detailing what to say, what to leave unsaid, how to maintain composure while asserting authority. The stakes felt higher than ever, but so did my readiness. I reflected on endurance, intelligence, and the lessons embedded in earlier interactions. My personal values, the calm observation, measured patience, and unwavering self-respect, became my anchor. Each revelation of my sister's duplicity reinforced my strategy, transforming anger into actionable insight. My mind sifted through patterns, recalling previous echo-emotional anchors, subtle nods, exchanged glances, and understated gestures that now served as tactical reference points. I felt prepared, resilient, and increasingly confident in my plan. As the evening shadows deepened and music from the main hall drifted upward, I held the revelations close, storing them for the precise moment to act. The tension in the room was palpable, yet my stance was deliberate, controlled. The balcony felt like a command post from which I could survey, calculate, and plan. Every detail, the placement of guests, the lighting, the hushed conversations, was data to be applied with precision. I exhaled slowly, a quiet smile forming. The next confrontation would not be impulsive, it would be deliberate, strategic, and decisive. The stage was set. The grand hall glittered under crystal chandeliers, music vibrating softly beneath the buzz of conversation. I felt the weight of the evening settle on my shoulders, a calm, focused tension replacing the earlier anxiety. Every observation I had meticulously noted from the balcony to the lounge converged in this moment. I adjusted the napkin in my hand, a small symbolic gesture that anchored me. Timing was everything. The evidence I had gathered, the subtle gestures, the whispered observations, they were all aligned with the social dynamics at play. I could feel the energy shifting around me, as if the room itself awaited the unfolding of what I had planned. My pulse steadied, anticipation tightening in my chest. I moved into the center of the gathering, careful yet deliberate, catching the eyes of key family members and respected guests. With measured calm, I revealed discrepancies that had been quietly orchestrated by my sister, misattributed contributions, manipulated acknowledgments, and hidden documents. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mixture of surprise and recognition. Guests leaned in subtly, some whispering their astonishment, others exchanging glances of quiet admiration. My sister's composure faltered, subtle tremors betraying her loss of control. Her attempts at damage control were visible, but she had no proof to counter the truth I laid out. I remained poised, letting the facts speak, watching the room shift in real time. Memories of endurance and resilience flickered in my mind, bridging past struggles with the present. Each slight and dismissal I had endured before now translated into calm confidence, reinforcing that intelligence and strategic patience outweighed reactive anger. I reminded myself of the countless times I had observed, calculated, and waited. Those moments, once filled with frustration, were now assets, giving me the upper hand. The slow realization of my own strength mingled with pride, cautious satisfaction curling in my chest. I was no longer invisible, my presence commanded attention without needing to raise my voice. The tension spiked as my sister attempted a counterstrike, spreading a subtle false narrative and challenging my evidence. A hush fell over nearby guests as they registered the contradiction. I adjusted quickly, weaving my statements and observations to reinforce credibility. A few peripheral allies, previously unnoticed, stepped in with subtle nods and affirmations, supporting the narrative I had carefully constructed. My mind raced, yet each move was deliberate, adaptive, and poised to maintain the upper hand. Every reaction, every glance, was a confirmation of my control of the social moment. Turning the tables required exploiting the cracks I had patiently catalogued, my sister's pride, her overconfidence, and occasional arrogance. I highlighted evidence with grace, timing each revelation to maximize impact. Charm and wit carried the truth effortlessly, and I sensed the room's perception shifting. Even the mayor, a guest of distinction, subtly acknowledged my rightful place through a nod and approving glance. It was a symbolic moment, crystallizing the reversal of influence. Relief surged through me, mingled with exhilaration, the scales of respect had shifted definitively. As the evening unfolded, the room reflected a newfound recognition of my intelligence and composure. Family members whispered among themselves, reassessing long-held biases and reinterpreting prior interactions. My sister's attempts to control the narrative faltered visibly, her usual air of authority diminished. I felt vindication, yet tempered with the awareness that strategy required continued observation. The validation was palpable, the room's energy now mirrored the careful planning and measured assertiveness I had displayed. The night lingered with anticipation, a delicate tension hanging over the hall as guests continued to mingle. My mind raced ahead, already planning subsequent moves, aware that this confrontation had set the stage but not concluded the broader shifts in family dynamics. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of subtle triumph settle, knowing the evening's events would resonate far beyond these walls. The game had changed, but the stakes remained high. I stepped back slightly, watching the aftermath with a quiet, deliberate satisfaction, ready for whatever unfolded next. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows of our Houston home, painting the walls with a gentle warmth that felt oddly restorative. I sat quietly, revisiting the journey that had brought me here, from the humiliation at the wedding, to the subtle confrontations, and finally to turning the tables on my sister. Each memory came unbidden, the whispered dismissals, the calculated slights, the moments I had stood alone yet determined. I reflected on the growth that had taken root in those painful experiences, the clarity gained from observing and strategizing. It was strange how betrayal could teach resilience, how invisibility could sharpen perception. Holding the small decorative item from the wedding, the folded napkin I had once clutched nervously, I smiled. It symbolized more than decor, it represented lessons learned, battles endured, and the intelligence I had relied on to navigate every obstacle. The past felt like a tapestry I could now view with distance and comprehension. By evening, the family atmosphere had begun to shift subtly. My sister's demeanor softened, her usual arrogance tempered with hints of acknowledgement. In a quiet corner of the reception, she met my eyes briefly, a flicker of remorse crossing her expression. The mayor, who had attended the wedding, approached to offer formal recognition of my contributions, both social and logistical, through a carefully worded compliment that carried weight beyond the words themselves. I felt a cautious hope rising within me. The tension was not entirely gone, trust was still tentative, but the acknowledgement was genuine. Observing the reactions of other family members, I noticed nods of understanding, silent gestures that conveyed respect where once there had been dismissal. A subtle realignment was underway, a social recalibration that I had influenced without confrontation, purely through patience and measured presence. This moment also provided personal vindication. I could finally assert my place within the family and among peers, not through anger or overt dominance, but by demonstrating the intelligence, grace, and poise that had long been overlooked. Quietly, those around me began to recognize the value I had consistently contributed, affirming that my efforts were not just noted but meaningful. The small nods, the whispered appreciations, the acknowledgement of my role in organizing and smoothing the wedding events, they collectively reinforced the truth I had carried silently for so long. Pride swelled, tempered by gratitude and the awareness that empowerment often grows quietly, unnoticed until it manifests at the right moment. Yet loose ends remained, as they always do. Subtle disputes and misunderstandings lingered among family members, conversations began cautiously about fairer treatment in the future. My sister faced the silent consequences of her earlier actions, her reflection visible in careful gestures and subdued words. Even small social cues carried meaning, a family member shifting position to include me in conversation, a previously dismissive relative seeking my input. These were minor, yet meaningful, victories, signaling that accountability and reflection had begun to take root. I noted each, quietly cataloging patterns that would guide future interactions and prevent past cycles from repeating. Looking ahead, I allowed myself a moment to envision the future. Self-respect, clearly established boundaries, and recognition of my own worth formed the foundation. I considered younger relatives in the room, observing patterns I had endured, recognizing my role as both guide and model. Reclaiming items that had once been overlooked, placing them in positions of significance, became symbolic gestures of growth and reclamation. Each small act was a declaration that I would neither be invisible nor undervalued again, that lessons learned would be passed forward. Finally, I revisited the echo of past symbols, the napkin, the gestures, the subtle nods that had accompanied my journey from humiliation to empowerment. They now represented triumph and maturity, resonating with the quiet satisfaction of a journey completed with dignity. I exhaled, letting the lingering sense of closure settle, bittersweet yet full of meaning. Life would continue with its challenges, inevitably, but now with clarity, preparedness, and confidence. I had moved beyond the past, not by forgetting, but by mastering the art of observation, strategy, and quiet assertion.